So we're gonna start. So good evening, everybody. This is Hiro Hamada. I'm a researcher at Araya and also moderator of this consciousness club. So actually, this is quite special for me because today's speaker is my PhD supervisor. So this is my tremendous pleasure to introduce Professor Kenji Doya from Okinawa Institute of Science Technology. Kenji got PhD from University of Tokyo, working on artificial neural network and I think motor control. And after that, his PhD, he went to San Diego, working on like more biological system with like lobster. And then he also worked with Professor Terry Sanofsky, famous for like artificial neural networks. He worked on the reinforcement learning model of like song learning. And then he worked. After his successful work in San Diego, he moved back to Japan and working with Dr. Mitsuo Kawato, working on like neuroscience, machine learning, and robotics, and so on. Since I think 2004, he started his own lab as a principal investigator in Okinawa, and then he contributed a lot to the not academically, but also institutional contribution to the OIST. And today, he contributed a lot like machine learning, robotics, and neuroscience. But I never heard of any idea about his idea about consciousness. So this is quite new to me, and I think new to us. So now let's welcome Kenji and listen his talk.
Okay, thank you, Hiro, for the nice introduction and also giving me this opportunity to talk at the Consciousness Club. Yeah, so it's quite, maybe it's my first time to talk about or related to things, consciousness. Okay, so I'm from this Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, which was first founded under the leadership of Dr. Sidney Brenner. And the major concept is making this institute very international and interdisciplinary. So we have more than half of the faculty and the students from outside of Japan, and we don't have any department. So we cover different topics from physics to biology, but no department. And we actually hired about 60 faculty members to cover all these interdisciplinary areas. Yeah. But we are still about a rather small university. So if you take a statistic and divide by numbers, so because of the small denominator, results can fluctuate a lot. And last year, it fluctuated upward. So in one of the Nature Index, they put us on the world top 10, slightly above MIT and Stanford. Hopefully, it will not fluctuate too low next year, right? And our lab, Neural Computation Unit, was the one of the first research unit to start in this institute. So we try to make this own lab interdisciplinary. So we ask the question of how to build adaptive systems, and then we also try to understand the brain's mechanisms for adaptation. So we work on robotics and machine learning, and also neurobiology experiments. But a common theme for this work is reinforcement learning. This is a framework for an agent, which can be like animal or human or robot or software to work with the environment. And then by exploration and the reward feedback, they try to come up with a good action policy to maximize the reward acquired. So, how to come up with the algorithms for a more efficient reinforcement learning for artificial agents is an important engineering topic, and also understanding the neural circuits and the possible molecular mechanism in the brain for reinforcement learning. That's a very interesting topic for neuroscience, right? So we are pursuing these kind of dual goals of creating and understanding reinforcement learning agents, right? So, these days, artificial intelligence become very popular, and because I'm working in between those two fields, many people ask what will be the relationship between AI and the brain. And some people say that to make intelligent machines by electronics, maybe we shouldn't bother about biological constraints. But some other people say that because there's already a very good implementation like our brain, why don't we reverse engineer that existing system? So previously, the AI was how to write down the human knowledge and the skills into a code. So learning from the brain wasn't a big issue. But recently, the AI is about learning from a big data. And doing that brain-like implementation, like deep learning, showed very high performance. So people are now, I think, thinking what we should learn from the brain to understand intelligence. So that's the kind of motivation for our current big Kakenji project called the correspondence and the fusion of AI and brain science. So in the first year, we had a kind of joint workshop with the people at Gatsby Unit and DeepMind in London and discuss about what we should further learn from the brain. So there are many viewpoints shown there. For example, energy efficiency and also data efficiency. The current deep learning takes a lot of data to be trained. And then for behind the data efficiency, use of models and the mental simulation and modularity and compositionality and meta-learning, those issues are very important. Also, the autonomy and living in the society, that might be an important difference in the current AI and brain. So today, my topic is mostly about this topic of the mental simulation. So, but let me start with the very basic of reinforcement learning. So in reinforcement learning, so the major concept is learning the value of states and action. Right? So this is V of S called the state value function. This is the expected future reward, the immediately, one step later, and so on. And this parameter gamma is called a temporal discounting parameter. So if gamma is 0, you just focus on the immediate outcome, and gamma goes close to 1, so you take into account the longer delayed outcome. And another type of value function called action value function, how much reward you're going to get by taking particular action A and a given state S. Right? And this action value function is helpful for action selection. So basically, if the action value function is perfectly learned, what you want to do is find an action which maximizes the expected reward in the current state. This is called greedy action selection. So if you want to do some stochastic search, so we often use the so-called Boltzmann action selection, take an action value function like a negative potential. So you want to take an action with the higher action value with a high probability. Here, beta is the parameter called inverse temperature. If beta is 0, you take a total random action. As the beta goes larger, any small difference in the expected reward is amplified, so action becomes more greedy. And after prediction and action selection, you learn from the actual result. Right? So that important signal is called a temporal difference error. So which is a discrepancy between what reward you predicted before taking action and the reward you acquired after taking action, and then still predict from the next state. Right? So if your prediction is perfect, these first two terms and the third term will cancel out. So this should be 0. And otherwise, you should learn from this error to update your previous state value function or action value function. Here, alpha is a parameter for the learning rate. So, and how to implement these steps more efficiently, robustly, that is a very important topic. And also, how to tune these parameters, like a temporal discounting and the inverse temperature and learning rate, that is also very important issue, which is sometimes called a kind of meta-learning. Yeah, so this is a very simple example of Pendulum Swing-Up. The reward is given by the height of this pendulum, And then why this agent is exploring this state space, angle and angular velocity, this agent learns which is a good state and which is a bad state. The white part is a better state, right? So this is a state value function. And as the experience goes, this agent learns that this is slowly decelerating path to the top of this peak position is a high value function. So basically, the reinforcement learner tried to climb up the hill of the state value function to come to the place with the highest reward. And you can do it in a physical system. So this is a robot that learns to stand back using the same mechanism. So this robot learns which is a better posture, which is a worse posture. And after doing hundreds of bumps and fall, this robot learns this kind of trajectory reaching to this final state. Right? So this is some example of successful use of reinforcement learning. But by doing this kind of experiments, we learn how to let the robots learn. Right? So important features include how to design the reward function. For example, in this case, reward, we give positive reward based on the height of the head, and also the negative reward when the robot falls down. But this balance between reward and punishment is very important. If you make the punishment too strong, the robot may be just lying down to avoid any punishment. Right? So, and also the choice of the temporal discounting is very important. So if you try to quickly get some reward, just sit up rather than standing up can also be another solution. Right? So we are interested in such kind of meta aspects of reinforcement learning. And then in humans and animals, our reward system, like food, water, and sex, and so on, may be related to, they are shaped by evolution. So, and how to design the reward function for the artificial creature. So that leads us to so-called cyber rodent project. So we try to build robots with the same constraint as biological agents. So which is like a self-preservation or survival by and also the self-reflection. So these robots can explore the environment to get the battery pack to keep moving. And also they use infrared communication to copy the program or the key parameters of the program. So and with this setup, we can build a robot colony. So they forage for the battery pack. And then when they are well charged, they look for possible mating partners. And then using like infrared communication, they copy their kind of what we call the genes. Right? So these robots, each physical robot has several virtual agents, and they have genes encoding like innate behaviors and also parameters for the reward function and for the parameters for reinforcement learning. And when they exchange these parameters, so we introduce a small mutation and selection based on the charged level of the internal battery. So this way you can implement the kind of embodied evolution in this robot colony. And this is the example of how the reward function evolved over generations. So in this robot, capturing the battery or a successful copy of the gene are the major source of reward. But using those final reward alone, it's very difficult to have a first successful experience. Right? So like we have smells and the taste to have a higher likelihood of getting the nutritious food. We also gave this robot reward based on the vision. Right? So, for example, based on the vision of the battery pack. And over the generations, so initially this function was random. Gradually, when the battery pack is seen in the center of the view and the closer, this robot has a higher visual reward. And for the case of vision of another robot, so the profile is somewhat different because the infrared communication is easier done at a certain distance. Right? So this way we could demonstrate that by combining reinforcement learning and evolutionary computation, so we can let robot to acquire their own reward system. And sometimes we observe rather unexpected behaviors. So in this robot, if you have a battery on one side and another robot on the other side, he has to decide whether to go for battery for charging, whether go for mating, for reproduction. And my former postdoc, Stefan, realized in some colony, so there can be some kind of variability of the behaviors. Some robots always go to the battery pack. And some robots like keep track of another robot and look for a mating opportunity. So like a hungry guy and a more romantic guy. And he ran the gene analysis of these robots and indeed found like two clusters of the gene. The basic difference is the kind of a bias for mating behavior, right? So if you see the level of battery charging to start mating, so these green guys started mating only when they are fully charged, and red guys try mating even they are not fully charged, right? And he could also show that these two subtypes can coexist stably by analyzing evolutionary stability. So, and this shows that, so robots can also have some kind of a personality or subtypes. And unfortunately, these robots became so old, so now we are building a new generation of robots using a smartphone just by giving two wheels. The smartphones have very good CPU and all kinds of sensors, and go charging. And for mating, you can use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but for us to better see what's happening, we let the robots to show a QR code to send genetic information, right? So this is our ongoing work. And while doing this kind of work to implementing reinforcement learning in robots, and then also dealing with the kind of meta aspect of reinforcement learning, we are also interested in how our brain implements reinforcement learning. So our brain may not be using exactly the same equation as these, but something like prediction of reward and selection of action and learning from the actual outcome may be probably something happening in our brain. So what kind of neural circuit or molecules are involved in this kind of reinforcement learning and also tuning of these parameters? That is our major topic in neuroscience. So, and regarding the implementation of reinforcement learning in the brain, so many people, including ourselves, believe that basal ganglia, which is a structure hidden under the cerebral cortex, plays a very important role. So the key finding is that these dopamine neuron, which project strongly to the site of the basal ganglia called striatum, has a reward prediction error-like activities, which was demonstrated by Wolfram Schultz and colleagues. And also my current colleague at OIST, Jeff Wickens, showed that these dopamine projection in the striatum shows a specific form of a plasticity called dopamine-dependent synaptic plasticity. So this is a kind of a dopamine-weighted Hebbian learning of the synapse from the cortex to the striatum, right? So with this finding of TD error-like activity with the dopamine neurons and the dopamine-dependent synaptic plasticity, many people start to think that this is the major structure for reinforcement learning. And our specific hypothesis is that those neurons in the striatum would encode something like state value function or action value function. And then to test such a hypothesis, we worked on the rat experiments. So this rat make a choice to the left or right, and depending on his choice, he is given a food pellet. And this probability of a food pellet is dependent on his choice, and he has to keep track of a changing probability of reward. And then we fit the animal's behavior to a reinforcement learning model to estimate the time course of action value, for example, to the left port in this case. And use this kind of estimate from our model as a kind of a fingerprint to look for interesting neurons. And then this neuron, for example, showed its activity this way, highly correlated with the action value function estimated from the behavior. And this activity was when the animal was hearing the cue tone for decision. And some other neurons also showed reward predictive activity, but not discriminating between left or right. So that might be related to a state value function. And one limitation in this electoral recording was that we didn't know what kind of neurons we are recording from. And more recently, we can use stereotype-specific recording of neurons using virus technology to express the calcium indicator in the specific type of neurons. So, and in this case, my former student, Tomohiko, observed activities of striatum neurons, which is known to project to the dopamine neurons. And he showed that some of these neurons indeed show reward predictive activities, like a state value function. Right? So these are the kind of evidence suggesting that basal ganglia plays an important role in reinforcement learning, especially its input state stratum may be involved in the learning of a state and action value function. So, but there are two major frameworks in reinforcement learning. So one is called model-free reinforcement learning. So in that case, we assume no prior knowledge for the agent, and then the agent learns simply from the sequence of state action reward or state action reward by learning state or action value functions. So the algorithm is very simple. So if you write in Python, maybe it's in just 3 or 4 lines. But it takes a lot of training samples. Another framework is called the model-based strategy. So in this case, the agents create an internal model of the world. Right? For example, the state transition model based on the action, and a model of where by taking which action you can get the reward. So if you have such an internal model, you can run kind of internal simulation for planning the best action. And also this internal model, dynamics model, is helpful in estimating the current state when the current sensory input is ambiguous. Right? So model-based strategy allows more flexible, data-efficient learning. But instead, the internal computation can be quite complicated. So this is one example of like a model-based reinforcement learning. This is a smartphone robot trying to bounce up and balance. So while initially doing this kind of random behavior, this robot learns the internal model, how the body responds to the wheel movement, and then use such a model to run offline simulation to improve the control policy. Then within just less than 10 trials, this robot could learn this kind of balancing behavior. So this is one example of a data efficiency of the model-based approach. So I think now, so mental simulation is a very important topic of neuroscience. So we can define the mental simulation as a brain's process using action-dependent state transition model. S prime equal FSA, this is a deterministic version. In general, this can be a probabilistic transition depending on your action. Right? So we can use such an internal model for estimation of the present state based on the previous state and action, which is very helpful under the perceptual uncertainty or delay or occlusion. And you can also use such an internal model for predicting the future from the current state for model-based decision and action planning. And you can use such a model for arbitrary state for a kind of a thought experiment. And probably use of language would be very much dependent on our capability of such imagination and simulating the virtual world. And also, of course, by establishing a theory of science, thought experiments are very important in the initial phase. So this mental simulation is from a sensory motor control to a higher cognitive function. I think it's a very important function of the brain. And using today's technology, I think it's possible to address the neural circuit and possibly the molecular mechanism behind the mental simulation. So regarding the possible implementation of the mental simulation, I have been advocating the view that major parts of the mammalian brain, the cerebellum and basal ganglia and the cerebral cortex, specialize in different frameworks of learning. The cerebellum for error-driven supervised learning, and the basal ganglia for scalar reward-driven reinforcement learning, and the cerebral cortex for unsupervised representation learning based on the statistics of the sensory input. So, and then how can we utilize these machinery for mental simulation and action, different types of reinforcement learning? For example, simple model-free reinforcement learning can be implemented by the network linking the state and action representation in the cortex and also action value function in the basal ganglia. So model-based action selection is a little bit complex. You need to first learn this kind of a forward model to predict the next state, and then use such a forward model to predict the future state and then evaluate it, and then select an action according to such a prediction and evaluation. But potentially that can be done in a network linking the cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. So this kind of forward model could be learned through the supervised learning of the previous sequence of state, action, next state. And indeed there are some suggestions that the cerebellum is involved in such a forward model. And then for the current sensory state, so somewhere in the brain would come up with the action candidate, and then the forward model in the cerebellum would predict the resulting state. And then the goodness of this resulting state may be evaluated by the state value function in the basal ganglia. And if the result is good enough, you actually execute action. And if it is not very good, maybe you have to come up with another action. So this is rather complex, but theoretically possible. But once you find out this is a good action take for this state, maybe you don't want to repeat this computation again and again. You just want to memorize the appropriate state to action mapping. And that can be done by a supervised learning after the right action was found. So maybe some other part of the cerebellum might be involved in more habitual memory-based action. And then to test such hypothesis, we worked on functional brain imaging experiment. So this is the task of a grid world game. You move this cursor from this point to this point. But to make this game interesting, we limited the movement of the cursor to only 3 of the 8 neighborhoods for the pressing of index, middle, ring fingers. And for some direction, there's no straight path, so you have to find out this kind of zigzag movement. So we call this a grid sailing task, right? Like the sailboat going upwind. Right? So and the point is that it is not easy to find such a path by just a random search. But once you know this kind of internal model, you can fairly efficiently find the optimal path. So we let the subjects to pre-practice this kind of internal model, action-dependent state transition model, and then show them a new target and let them find out the path. And then we gave a few seconds before they actually start pressing buttons. So if they can use such an internal model, so their performance can be improved. So from the subject behavior with and without this the time for planning, we actually verified that the subject was using the learned internal model to plan ahead for the right sequence of actions. Right? And then we analyzed the subject's brain activity during such a pre-start delay time. And we found activities in the areas like parietal cortex and premotor cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. But in addition, we also found activities in the lateral part of the cerebrum, which are known to project to these cortical areas, and also the anterior part of the basal ganglia, which receive input from these areas. So the result is consistent with the hypothesis that state and action representation and working memory capability of the cortex associated with the forward model of the cerebellum and evaluation mechanism in the basal ganglia would be utilized for model-based action planning. So this is still just a kind of activation study, but we are hoping to do some more decoding work to clarify what kind of actual function and representation were utilized in these brain areas. And we are also interested in understanding the mechanism of mental assimilation in a cellular level. Right? So to witness the stage of mental assimilation or the functioning of this action-dependent state transition model, you can use at least two ways. One is a phase of action planning, like in the previous MRI study. So to evaluate the goodness of action, you use the action-dependent state transition model. But to show the use of such a state transition model, difficulty is that this action is imaginary. So it is hard to tell which action, for example, animal was imagining in a particular moment. Another way of using this action-dependent state transition model is for state estimation. For example, in a dynamic Bayesian inference framework, you have a current estimate of the state and combine that with action-dependent state transition model to predict the possible future state. This works as a prior, and then you combine that with the sensory observation likelihood to compute a posterior after taking action and receiving a sensory observation. Right? So the simplest example of this kind of dynamic Bayesian filter is like a Kalman filter. And then in this case, a good thing is that the input to this state transition model is actual state and the actual action. So probably you can make a better analysis of the neural activity. Okay. So and before going to the experimental result, let me quickly show some example of like a dynamic Bayesian inference. So this is the Python code on my website, which I use at the Okinawa Computation Neuroscience course about Bayesian inference. And yeah, you can go and check the code if you are interested. So this is a kind of an inference task. So rat or mouse is walking in a kind of a ring, like arena. And then he sometimes stops, sometimes moves. This is we discretize this circle into 6 segments. And then this is like a state transition model of the mouse. Right? And then we have an observation. So we have like 3 sensors on this circular the field. But those sensors have a kind of rather wide field of the view. So from the single observation, so you cannot tell where the animal actually is. And also the sensory observation is intermittent. So often, those non-double sensors respond. Right? So from such uncertain kind of intermittent observation, whether we can estimate location with this target, that is an issue. So this is one example. This blue one is the real position of the mouse. And this red dot is the observation, responsible to 3 sensors. And many often, the sensors are not responding. But by using the dynamic Bayesian inference, so yeah, this is a result of inference. Initially, your estimate is flat, but as you receive a sensory input, this distribution is narrowed down. And then based on the dynamic model, this is, shifts forward even when there's no sensory input. And then when the sensory input comes in, this distribution becomes sharper. So such a prediction by the state transition model and refining based on the sensory input, that is what we do in the dynamic Bayesian inference. Okay. So and then to do something similar for the mouse, we came up with this kind of setup. So in this case, the mouse is sitting on an air-floated ball with the head fixed under the microscope. So this is a so-called 2-photon microscope, which can use infrared light to monitor the activities of neurons about 0.5 millimeter down the surface of the brain. So we did surgery to remove certain part of the skull and cover that with the glass so that we can observe the brain of the mouse while he is engaged in the task on this air-floated ball with the head fixed. So this is a virtual auditory environment. So as he moves on this air-floated ball, the sound feedback is changed so that he can understand that he's coming close to the target. And when he arrives to this virtual goal, so he is given sugar water. And then while the mouse is doing this task, we could monitor the activities of hundreds of neurons. Right? And then we applied the decoding of these neural activity using kind of a probabilistic decoder. So basically, we first identify the distance tuning of these neurons. And then from the instantaneous activity of neuron, we combine the likelihood coming from these neural activity with a flat prior to come up with a posterior distribution. And then this is the vertical bar is the actual distance. And then this target distance, goal distance, decoded from the neural population activity, roughly follows or sometimes precedes the actual goal distance of the mouse in this virtual environment. Right? And important finding was that sometimes we shut off the sound feedback. So in this trial, the red part, we have the sound feedback, but the white part, there's no sound feedback. But still, this representation by the neural population moves closer to the target. So that shows that this network would be involved in something like action-dependent state estimation based on action-dependent state transition model. So using his own locomotion to estimate how close he came to the target. And this is a recording from the mouse's posterior parietal cortex. And in fact, when we use a drug to inactivate these neurons, so mouse behavior was changed when the sound feedback was turned off. Right? So when the sound is given, he can still estimate the goal distance, but under the blockade of parietal cortex, so mouse could not estimate the goal distance. Sometimes he kind of overran or didn't understand how close he came to the target. So, and this is the kind of a observation that the particular group of neurons are involved in the maintenance and update of the external state using a kind of internal model of how the goal distance changes by locomotion. So, and we are trying to further analyze these neural activities to better understand the dynamics behind such the Bayesian inference in the brain. So one limitation in the current experiment is that we recorded the activity of neurons in a certain layer, for example, layer 2, layer 3, or layer 5, in the different sessions. So, but there are some suggestions that the network linking different layer of the cortex would be implementing something like a dynamic Bayesian inference. So to test that, we are now doing a new experiment using so-called prism lens. So this is a little bit invasive, but you can use a prism to observe the cortex from sideways. So if this experiment goes well, we should be able to observe the activity of neurons in the superficial layer and deep layer simultaneously. So this is still ongoing work, but we are hoping that we can find out the dynamic behind such a dynamic Bayesian inference. Right? And these are about how to compute like a future reward based on the state inference. But another important topic is how to tune these parameters. So for example, this robot find a battery pack and go for it. But this robot was initially doing like a random search, but somehow learned to sit still. So this robot can see the battery pack, but doesn't want to approach to it unless the battery pack goes very close to the robot. So if it is further than certain distance, he is not interested anymore. So we wondered what was happening in this robot, but the key difference was this temporal discounting factor. So if this parameter gamma is large enough, you have a large weight for the delayed reward. But if the gamma is small, gamma square, gamma cube converge quickly to 0. So if you have to spend certain energy to get the energy back in the future, the entire evaluation can be negative. So it's better do nothing. Right? So that's what's happening is this kind of depressed like a robot. But sometimes this steep discounting have a different effect. For example, so you have a immediate reward, but the later punishment. So small gamma does not allow evaluation with this negative effect, so you cannot resist this temptation. Yeah, so it's something like what we experience after over drinking, right? Yeah, right. So and but in the reinforcement learning, setting the gamma large enough, but not too large is very important, because if the gamma is very close to 1, you have to predict a long future, which is very impossible, and then makes your learning slower. So, but we are also interested in how such a parameter might be controlled in our brain. So, and we came up with the hypothesis that the brain's molecular system called serotonin may play some important role. One reasoning for that is that many of the drugs used for the therapy of depression enhance the activity of function of serotonin, maybe bring a brain in this state back to this state. Right? And we have been doing a series of work involving serotonin. Most recently, we are working on the method called optogenetics. So this new method allows us to stimulate the selected type of neurons. And this mouse, by genetic manipulation, the light-sensitive molecules are expressed in the serotonin-producing neurons. And by stimulating by blue light, we can selectively stimulate serotonergic neurons. Yellow light just turn off such a stimulation. Right? So, and we change the reward waiting time 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 9 seconds, and infinity. Right? And for the 9-second waitings, often animal abandons to wait, but serotonin stimulation by blue light, such abandoning decreased. In infinity waiting condition, so usually mouse abandons after like 10 seconds, but by serotonin stimulation blue light, they waited much longer. Right? So the serotonin stimulation makes the animal more patient for delayed reward. So that was like consistent with the hypothesis that the serotonin is involved in manipulation of the temporal discounting. Right? But more recently, we found that this effect is kind of a conditional. So this effect is gone when the reward probability is low. And also, this effect is stronger when the reward timing is more varied compared to the reward timing is always the same. Right? So to explain such a phenomenon, we kind of revised our model in a model-based framework. And a model which assumes that the serotonin manipulates the prior for the reward probability for each trial can explain this kind of effect of probability and timing uncertainty in extending the waiting time. Right? So these are the kind of things we do about like a meta aspect of reinforcement learning and also how our brain implements kind of a mental simulation. Right? And I was drawn into this community of consciousness and awareness by a guy called Pete Hutt at Advanced Institute in Princeton. So we organized a summer school together with Pete, Naotsuya, and Ryota Kanai, and other people. Hiro was also here. And then here I had the opportunity to learn about modern study about consciousness. For example, this slide by Naotsuya is available on this website. So he introduced about, for example, integrated inference theory of consciousness, right? So existence, composition, and information and integration and exclusion. These are the 5 criteria for integrated information theory. Like this kind of explanation. So IIT can be considered as a loss of predictability of the past state when the system is kind of divided into the 2, or integrated information can be considered as a distance between actual and the disconnected model, right? So I was interested in this kind of a theoretical approach to consciousness, but at the same time, I was still not convinced. So these try to capture some kind of features of the conscious system, but that doesn't really explain how the consciousness evolved in history of the animal. So and for the study of behaviors, Tinbergen's 4 questions are quite fundamental. So he posed 4 major questions for explaining a behavior. So one aspect is how such a behavior is realized, called proximate view, and question about mechanism, how such a behavior is realized, and also in time, how such a behavior or function is developed. And also he asked a question of why, which is called ultimate or evolutionary view. So what is this behavior for? And then how it evolved for the sake of certain fitness, right? So you have to address all these 4 questions to clearly understand the behavior. That was his point. So maybe the theory like IIT gives some answers to like how does it work, but that doesn't really tell about why that had to be evolved and why that is helping humans and some animals. Right? So and one reason I have been focusing on the like mental simulation is that we know such a model-based processing can be helpful, right? And then after hearing this theory of consciousness, like IIT, yeah. So I started to think that maybe the data assimilation might be a good analogy of consciousness. So data assimilation is a framework of a real-time computer simulation, which is the most successful method in, for example, weather forecast. So you build a numerical model of the atmosphere and the ocean and also the landscape, and then run simulation. But in such a big simulation, difficulty is how to set the initial state, right? So measurement points are limited, right? And sometimes the data comes with some certain delay. So, but if you have you can start from some tentative initial state and run the simulation. And then for whatever observation available, you put into the model, like correcting the state and also correcting the parameter based on the framework of Bayesian inference. So this result of a simulation gives a prior, and then you combine that with the likelihood coming from the observed data. So to keep track of the current state of the environment. Right? So and this thing uses a dynamics model and observation model, and then use a real-time simulation. And by utilizing sparse multimodal data to best estimate the current state and best prediction of the future state. Right? So this is involved in predicting the future. And also from the current observation, you can look back and then re-estimate the previous history. Right? So you can use it for postdiction and also parameter estimation. So maybe such a feature would be similar to the features of our consciousness. And also, if you divide such a simulator into the two, maybe the performance of the simulator will drastically degrade. So it is well connected. It can run offline, or when available, it can integrate multiple sensory inputs. So maybe our brain would be also running something like data assimilation. And then the internal representation used for such a data assimilation may be related to what we think as a consciousness. That is the way I think of what consciousness could be. Right? So going back to the Tim Bergen's 4 questions. So the mechanism is like a dynamic Bayesian inference. And then for the development, maybe it's a result of learning of the internal model of the environment. And why? So we can use that for estimation of the current state and past state, and also you can predict the future. So this is very important for animal survival. And also, in terms of the evolution, the cortical circuit would be critically involved in such a mental simulation. So over the history of evolution of the brain, especially in mammals, as they acquire the neocortex, such a system for dynamic Bayesian inference evolved and ultimately allow us to give something like consciousness. Right. So, this is the last slide for the, This Pete Hutt is the guy who drove me to this kind of a community. So he was originally astrophysicist, now works at the Tokodai LC regarding the origin of life, and he's now most interested in the origin of intelligence. Right? So, to explain the origin of the universe, so people called for gods. Right? So even these days, the origin of the universe is explained more or less by the Big Bang theory, although we don't still know why Big Bang happened. But the process of evolution of the universe is now becoming better explained by physics. So, and to explain the origin of life, we previously called for the soul, right? So, but with the development, progress of biology, we can explain the mechanism of life. These days, not assuming a soul in the cell or the creature. And to explain human intelligence, people currently call for consciousness. Right? So, but do we continue to need a concept like a consciousness forever? Or it can be more decomposed into concrete processing? So that is something we would discuss here. Okay, so I thank for my collaborators for these lines of work. And also I have one announcement. So we are holding an internal symposium for our AI and brain science project. So we are inviting many people working in the border of AI and brain science, like Jan Lucan and Josh Tenenbaum, Carl Freestone, and so many people. So it will be held next October at the University of Tokyo. So we will make an official announcement sometime next year, but this might be an interesting opportunity for you to join discussion here. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, so we have a lot of time, so any questions?
Yes. Yes, please.
So I don't know if you understand well, but your last quote basically seemed to imply that you don't want, you're ready to drop the idea of consciousness, like you drop the idea of the soul, which I kind of agree totally with. But so it comes back to actually this slide, the question, and how you try to explain consciousness. Because everything you explain to me in consciousness, from your view, seems to be unconscious, actually processes. You don't want, because I don't see how you can, for example, create qualia actually learning a model of the world. That doesn't explain why there's qualia. So can you explain your position on consciousness?
So this is more like what the mental simulation does for us, right? So and then as we build a model of the environment with multisensory integration, so we have some kind of estimated state, right? So and then I think consciousness would be related to such inferred state of the environment, or sometimes predicted state of the environment, including your body. So, but why such a process of dynamic Bayesian inference or data assimilation cause the kind of qualia we think we have is still a mystery. Yeah. So I don't have a good explanation for that point, right? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for your wonderful talk. And one question is, so now in neuroscience we usually have two very good models to explain human behavior or anything like one is reinforcement learning and
Yeah.
found maybe it's the behavior is not fit, like reinforcement learning, and then you switch to the Bayesian agent. But it's and you sometimes we can add some prior to the Bayesian agent, so we can explain a lot of things.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, and how do you reconcile these two models for animal or human behavior, or it's just for fitting data?
Yeah, so reinforcement learning is a very good framework when you consider issues like survival or reproduction. So Bayesian inference can be more general. So for whatever things to estimate, you can apply Bayesian inference. And also because of the duality of inference and planning. So you can reform some task of reinforcement learning into the problem of Bayesian inference. So yeah, so to me, the Bayesian framework is more general, and then reinforcement learning is more focused on like issues like survival. So that's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a following question is,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, probably in our brain we
Yeah.
have multiple behavior
Yeah.
model or mechanism, say, to make decision. So, but in related consciousness so we always have the agents sense of agency that we make this decision. But how can we have like one intentionality, but we have multiple models simultaneously happening in the brain?
Yeah, so intentionality probably is related to like model-based action planning, rather than just automatically doing action based on a given content sensory input. So you would consider several action candidates and then estimate its effect, right? So such a model-based action planning, I think is related to sense of agency, but I don't have a better answer beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that
Yeah.
we have almost identical
Yeah,
idea
yeah.
about functions of consciousness. So, so in a way, I've been claiming consciousness is for model-based behavior. And then once we consider functional consciousness that way,
Yeah.
we can explain a lot of things.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very satisfying. And so, but I think that there are two things in your idea. So one
Yeah.
is this kind of like a model-based behavior.
Yeah.
And the other one was data assimilation.
Yeah.
I think these two may be connected or may not be connected. But I think they both serve for some sort of like generality of intelligence. So for once we have a good forward model, we can
Yeah.
use it for solving like new
Right.
problems.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think it's one way to implement novel problems.
Yeah.
It's data efficient. So it's
Right. Yeah.
like learning from scratch. But I think for data assimilation, so in a way, like consciousness researchers have been talking about like multimodal integration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of sign of consciousness.
Yeah.
But that concept has been vague. But I think this concept is also related to
Yeah.
generality and also the theory called a global workspace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in global workspace theory, like the idea is like we have many specialized modules.
Yeah.
But then some intelligent part or consciousness flexibly combine them to solve novel problems. But this is a slower process.
Yeah.
But it's another way to implement generality. But I think the concept of data assimilation is multiple modules. Because so I've been thinking maybe global workspace
Mm.
is some sort of shared latent space for many modules. So
Right.
in that sense, I think this idea could be
Yeah.
sort of considered as a more computational
Mhm.
interpretation
Yeah.
of global workspace. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that way, so maybe like you already have
Mhm.
this kind of idea implicitly, but I think now it's getting like really important to
Mhm.
think about potential function consciousness
Yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of
Mm.
how we implement artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, I also agree. So yeah, so this data assimilation, you have a model of like atmosphere and the ocean, and multiple models are kind of integrated, and you can include different kinds of sensors like satellite image or the weather station on land. So whatever kind of information is combined. So it's very similar to what was raised in like something like global workspace theory. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that this kind of interpretation
Mm.
gives us more
Yeah.
concrete
Mm.
computation framework
Yeah.
about somewhat vague idea of global workspace.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's another thing that I want to say, which is maybe related to one of the other questions.
Mm.
So we don't know why model-based
Mm.
sort of computation
Mm.
gives rise to conscious experience. But
Mm.
I think maybe like we can learn something from IIT, which is
Mm.
what is how can we decide whether an arbitrary physical system has a model or engages with model-based behavior? I think there must be a way to sort of define this concept mathematically from an intrinsic perspective. But that seems to be a very difficult question, but I think that's very important theoretical question.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, today's computers are very good at the simulation. Once we define the state variable and the model equation, but we are not given such a like a priori state or dynamics. We somehow are able to pick up the important state variable and then acquire some model of how they evolve over time with a certain action. So yeah, so the way our brain pick up such a state representation and learn dynamics, I think that is a really interesting question, and then probably that will be constrain what kind of consciousness we would have. Right? Yeah. So I don't know answer yet, but that's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very exciting to
Yeah.
see that you also have the same idea. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising when we talk about consciousness.
Yeah.
Just disagree with.
So, yeah.
It's a very unusual situation, but maybe I believe this is the right direction.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
My question is related to what Kanai-san said.
Yeah.
I was interested in your very last statement that to explain human intelligence, people came up with this consciousness. And so I'd like to hear what you think about the relation between the intelligence and consciousness. And I know that they're in notion very different, but at the same time they're related in some way. So and Kanai-san seems to have the idea that if you develop a system that has the sufficiently high intelligence, then the consciousness is, automatically follows and emerges. And I think that's a kind of optimistic idea, but your idea seems to be similar. Or do you think the consciousness is something separate from the
Yeah. For intelligence, what's important is a simulation. Having an internal model to simulate, to estimate current or predict the future. So, and then, such a system with the capability of simulation somehow have a good way of representing the predicted state. So, that might be the origin of consciousness. But for intelligence, consciousness would be related, but what is more important is simulation itself, I think.
So we still have time, so after the talk, you can chat a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, let's thank again, Kenji.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is finished, and we're going to have another talk next week by Hirai from Fukuoka University. He's a philosopher. It's quite, I think, different from today's talk, but if you're quite interested, please come again next Friday. Yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you, Hiro.